Since it is such a busy season, why don't we take just a moment and take a deep breath? And as the lights go down, imagine that you are someone who is seeking refuge, and you are out under a starlit sky. The Christmas stories at their heart are stories about seeking and finding refuge under the care of a living God who is our refuge and our strength. May the refuge we discover in the divine presence found in this compassionate congregation give us hope for reformed lives and a changing world.
I come into this place, this very sacred place, a place where I find refuge, a place where I can rest, a place where I am blessed, a place I am accepted, and here I find hope. A hope that is greater than all of my fears and all of my failures. This is my place of
It is our tradition during Advent to offer lights of hope, peace, joy, and love. Today we offer the light of hope to shine brightly in our hearts, in this church, and around the world. May it inspire us to be hopeful people and to hope in a world that is too often filled with despair.
And I come into this place, this very sacred place, a place where I find refuge. It's a place where I can rest. It's a place where I am blessed. A place I am accepted. And here I find hope. A hope that is greater than all my failures and all of my failures. This is my place of refuge.
an account of the genealogy of Jesus, the Messiah, the son of David, and the son of Abraham. Now, Abraham was the father of Isaac. And Isaac was the father of Jacob. And Jacob was the father of Judah and his brothers. And Judah was the father of Perez and Zerah by Tamar. And Perez, the father of Hezron. And Hezron, the father of Aram. And Aram, the father of Amminadab. And Amminadab, the father of Nahshon. And Nahshon, the father of Salmon. And Salmon, the father of Boaz by Rahab. And Boaz, the father of Obed by Ruth. And Obed, the father of Jesse. And Jesse, the father of King David. And David was the father of Solomon by the wife of Uriah. And Solomon, the father of Rehoboam. And Rehoboam, the father of Abijah. And Abijah, the father of Asaph. And Asaph, the father of Jehoshaphat. And Jehoshaphat, the father of Joram. And Joram, the father of Uzziah. And Uzziah, the father of Jotham. And Jotham, the father of Hazaz. And Hazaz, the father of Hezekiah. And Hezekiah, the father of Manasseh. And Manasseh, the father of Amos. And Amos, the father of Josiah. And Josiah, the father of Jeconiah. And Jeconiah's brothers at the time of the deportation to Babylon. And after the deportation to Babylon, Jeconiah was the father of Salalthiel. And Salalthiel was the father of Zerubbabel. And Zerubbabel was the father of Abiud. And Abiud was the father of Eliakim. And Eliakim was the father of Azor. And Azor was the father of Zadok. And Zadok was the father of Achim. And Achim was the father of Eliud. And Eliud was the father of Eleazar. And Eleazar was the father of Mathan. And Mathan was the father of Jacob. And Jacob was the father of Joseph. And Joseph was the husband of Mary. And Mary was the one of whom Jesus was born and called the Messiah. Genealogies are fascinating, aren't they? Have any of you done much digging into your family trees? Some. That's become a little bit easier with all the digital stuff. It's a little bit easier to find records than it has been in the past. And whenever we go digging about in our family tree, we often find some interesting things. Some things maybe that we didn't know that we're proud of. Maybe some things that we're not so proud of, or maybe even ashamed of. But the interesting thing about our genealogies is that they help give us a sense of identity, help us to know where we came from, to what people we belong, for better or for worse. And when we have pieces missing, it can be kind of hard, because it means that that piece of our identity is gone. And I think we also have to recognize that there are whole groups of people for whom it is extremely difficult to determine their genealogy for all kinds of reasons, but perhaps particularly for people who were stolen from their land and forced into enslavement. That is not just historical details that are missing, it is a whole sense of identity that is unknown and was stolen. Genealogies, I think, are fascinating. And so perhaps it's not too surprising that we find genealogies of Jesus in the Gospels. Now I should get this out of the way and say that 2 of the Gospels have birth narratives in them. You know what they are? Luke and Matthew, that's right. And 2 of the Gospels don't talk about Jesus' birth at all. So Mark begins with Jesus' baptism, and the Gospel of John begins with this poetic prologue about how Christ was pre-existent with God. But Matthew and Luke ground Jesus with a birth narrative. They're different, and we'll talk about them. But they also choose to include genealogies. Do any of you spend a lot of time reading those genealogies? No? I can't believe that. Do you skip over those when you read? Because that's what I do. I don't spend a lot of time with those genealogies. You heard how long it takes to get through that. Matthew and Luke both choose to include genealogies, though, and they're different in 3 different ways, primarily. 1, they are literally different. They have different names in them. 2, they are at different places in the gospel. So Matthew starts out with the genealogy that we just heard at the very beginning of the chapter and at the very beginning of his book. Luke waits all the way until chapter 3, after he's told the birth narrative, to get into the genealogy. And 3, they go in different directions. So Luke starts with Jesus and works all the way back to Adam and then ultimately to God, because Luke wants to show that Jesus is of God. Matthew does the opposite. Matthew starts not with God, but with Abraham, and then works down to Jesus. And that's because Matthew wants to show his audience, who's primarily Jewish, that Jesus is the fulfillment of Jewish Scripture, that he is the Messiah, and that he is the new Moses who has come along to reinterpret the law. More on that next week. But the genealogies are different. Matthew's genealogy has this long list of names, and as long as it is, he leaves a whole bunch of people out. He chooses who he wants to include and leaves a whole bunch of people out. And it's organized in 3 sets of 14 names. Now, that's because 7 is a holy number, and 2 times 7 is 14, right? So it's a holy number, 14. And Matthew wants to show that every 14 generations, something cataclysmic happens. So there's Abraham, and then 14 generations later, there is David, who is seen as kind of an ideal king, the one from whom the Messiah is supposed to come. And then 14 generations after that is the exile to Babylon. And then 14 generations after that is Jesus, who has come as a fulfillment of prophecy to reinterpret the law. That's all fascinating, I suppose. But what I think is actually really interesting about Matthew's genealogy, and the reason that I wanted to talk about it, is because he subverts norms whenever he compiles his genealogy. Because genealogies are almost always father to son, right? But did you notice who was included in this genealogy? Women. Matthew decided to include women in his genealogy, which is something that has confounded scholars and theologians for almost 2,000 years. Why did he decide to subvert the norm and include 5 women in Jesus' genealogy? They're the ones who are with larger ornaments and in red on Jesus' family tree so that you can see them. 4 of those 5 women are Gentiles. They are outsiders. They're people who did not belong to the covenant, with the exception of Mary. The other 4 are Gentiles. And I think that's important, and I think that is important for knowing who Jesus is and who his ministry is going to be too. But I think there's something else going on here as well. Each of these 5 women was involved in some kind of sexual scandal. I know. This is getting more interesting, isn't it? Sexual scandal is always interesting. That's why we like to watch soap operas and politics and all of that stuff. Tamar has a husband who has died, and she has to trick her father-in-law into getting her pregnant. That may sound weird, but that was the law. He had an obligation, it was called the levirate obligation, to give her an heir. And that was because in the ancient world, property was tied into that. And she had to stand up for herself, and trick her father-in-law into doing what was ultimately right. Rahab was a prostitute who helped the Israelites come into the land of Canaan. Bathsheba, who is mentioned in the genealogy as the wife of Uriah, was sexually assaulted by King David. And I think that the reason Matthew doesn't just say Bathsheba, but says the wife of Uriah, is to remind us of that and the abuse of power. David assaulted her and then had her husband killed so that he could be with her. And even though the Messiah was to be descended from David, David was someone who greatly abused his power. And Ruth, who had to seduce her kinsman in order to financially survive. And then, of course, Mary, who was an unwed teen mother who Matthew tells us Joseph wanted to dismiss and get rid of, but ultimately chooses not to through divine intervention in the story. You see, I think that these women are women who were dealt bad cards, but didn't just serve as sideline characters, didn't even just serve as catalysts for the story. They became the center of the story. They were people who fought against the injustice in their world, and they were people who advocated for themselves and who found a way to survive. Those women, 4 of whom were Gentiles as well, are the people from whom Jesus comes. Ooh, that's kind of getting exciting, isn't it? You see what's happening here? We are finding that people who have found hope in the midst of despair are the people who are a part of Jesus' family tree. I think Matthew also uses this as a way to show us that even though there was kind of a scandal around Mary, that God has a history of using people in situations like that to do God's work in the world. People who have been beaten down, people who have been marginalized by their society, those are the people who God chooses. It doesn't matter their race, doesn't matter their gender. It is those people that God has chosen to bring hope to a weary world. And while we're talking about the scandal surrounding Mary, I suppose I should also say at just the very beginning of Advent that Mary was absolutely, positively not a virgin when she gave birth to Jesus. That whole concept of virginity is kind of culturally defined anyway, but we know biologically that that is an impossibility, of course, in the 21st century. But even beyond that, listen to this. Matthew is trying to fulfill prophecy in Isaiah that he accidentally misinterprets. So Matthew is reading in the Greek, but the Hebrew word that Matthew interprets from Isaiah as virgin doesn't mean virgin. It means young woman. And some theologians have tried to say, well, you know, all young women in that society were virgins, but that's a pretty large interpretive leap, one that I'm not quite willing to make. So Matthew misinterprets this and applies it to his story. But even so, you know, in the ancient world, it was very common to say that someone was born of a virgin as a tool to foreshadow narratively that they were going to live an important life. Let me give you some examples. Plato was said to have had a virginal birth. So were Romulus and Remus. The Egyptian gods Ra and Horus also said to have been born of virgins. The Buddha was said to have been born of a virgin. There's this wonderful story about an elephant entering his mother's side to impregnate her, and then the Buddha is born. But perhaps most significantly, catch this, the Roman emperor was said to have had a virginal birth. When Matthew and Luke say that Jesus has been born of a virgin, they are putting him at odds with the Roman emperor from the very beginning of the story. They are saying, no, it's not the Roman emperor who is special. It's not the Roman emperor who is of God. It is Jesus, the Messiah. Ooh, man, there's a lot that can come out of a genealogy, isn't there? You see, it's actually incredibly theologically significant what Matthew is doing here. So I actually kind of love reading the genealogies. It's a lot of names, but in those genealogies, we find a message of hope. We find the story of God, the way that God works in our world, through unexpected places and through unexpected people. This Advent, as we are trusting in God who is our refuge and strength, may the stories that we hear inspire us to be hopeful people and to bring hope to a weary world. May it be so, and thanks be to God.